again, we'll move on from Derrick Rose, but as I mentioned, but in the last two videos, we had a three-way tie for this position. So the player we had just on top of him, on top of Derrick Rose and DeJounte Murray, we had Eric Bledsoe.
Yes.
He doesn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Bledsoe, just like you said, is a guy who doesn't seem to do much wrong, but he's not really a guy who ever lived up to the potential either. Where I remember with the Los Angeles Clippers, a lot of people viewed him and Eric Gordon in the same light, and I just felt like Eric Gordon was always just a lot better of a player. Obviously, until very recently, Bledsoe has been a bit more in terms of a consistent two-way player, but in terms of ever being really an all-star, obviously never happened for Bledsoe, and I don't think he's going to go up anytime soon. I think it'll be a pretty similar year to last year, as long as he continues to be the starting point guard over Lonzo Ball, or at least get close to starting minutes. Probably play some shooting guard too. He'll put up at least 15
Shooting
per
guard.
game. Yeah, put up at least 15 per game. Puts up usually 5 assists per game. Good rebounder for the position. Doesn't shoot awfully. You just, as long as you have guys around him, he just does a lot better. He's not a guy you want taking the final shot. I don't find he just, in Milwaukee, that's definitely where they struggled to have the ball in the hands of either him or Giannis when they're not really pull-up shooters. So they just really need to make sure Brandon Ingram takes that role.
For me, the only reason Bledsoe is so low is because of his lack of showing up in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I see Bledsoe in the regular season, and like we look at all these different parts of the Milwaukee Bucks, and we go, that guy's not that good. That guy's not that good. Together, they're freaking amazing. Bledsoe was essentially the perfect complement in the regular season to Giannis. I know he doesn't shoot the ball that well. They could use a better shooter. Holiday's a bit better on defense, but any given year, I can see him having a better year than Holiday. He just hasn't shown up in the playoffs and hasn't been consistent because they haven't needed him to score, right? They haven't needed him to even run the floor. They just need him to take every other shot, and it's sad to say, but it's going to be the same thing in New Orleans. It's the only reason he's not any higher. He's got the talent to be a little bit higher than this skill, but I just don't see him getting, like I say, getting much better production than what he's put up the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's, I mean, a guy who obviously is getting up there in age as well. He is, I believe, I want to say 31 or 32 in terms of age now. So obviously, in terms of being a bit past his prime, it did happen. Did have a couple over 20-point per game years in Phoenix, but he has really digressed in that regard. Like you said, obviously they needed to rely on him less for scoring in Milwaukee, and that's really why he found himself in New Orleans, like you said as well, because he doesn't need to really be the guy in any regard. He just needs to be a decent player, and we know that's what he'll be. That just doesn't allow him to move up much on this list. A lot of people even argue he should be lower on this list. A lot of people, like you said, guys like DeJounte Murray, they might value more because they feel like he could at least have the same offensive production and he's probably a better defensive player. But in terms of what we've seen from them so far, I'm still more confident in Bledsoe being a better player this year than him. But I could be wrong on that definitely because he's not a guy who I think is going to have he's not going to have a better year than he's had recently. Like you said, too, he's in a very similar situation.
Don't you find it funny that Milwaukee was too cheap to keep Brogdon? And they picked Bledsoe over Brogdon, saying they can only have one. There can only be one. Okay, well, Brogdon was young. You should have went with Brogdon. They had essentially a very, very, very similar year the year before that, like right when Brogdon signed with Indiana. Bledsoe and Brogdon had a very similar year. They were essentially playing the same role, except Brogdon shot the ball better, and Bledsoe moved the ball better. That was their main difference. Is Bledsoe's a bit better on defense. That's the main difference.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Brogdon now, you could argue he's better at moving the ball. So definitely weird, like you said, weird that they decided to pay one versus the other when the former was a better three-point shooter as well as moves the ball better now. So,
but it's just Milwaukee being cheap, right? And doing things like that is one of the reasons why Giannis is thinking about leaving. But moving on